Perfect. Well, welcome formally to our information session on the Leadership in Society initiative, where your next chapter matters. We have a five-part agenda. We are going to hear from our speakers. Then we're going to give you a snapshot of LSI. We're going to talk about the learning journey. We will go through the timeline and details, and then we will reserve at least 15 minutes for question and answer. And we have an intimate group today, so we hope to get to every question in the audience. So let me start by saying that I am Seth Green. I'm the Dean of the University of Chicago Graham School, and I serve as the decanal sponsor of the Leadership in Society initiative. This is a university-wide initiative. It involves every school and division and all of the incredible world-renowned faculty here. But we have the ultimate joy of being the operational home here at the Graham School for Diana Petty and her extraordinary team, and for this initiative. And I'll just say, by way of background, my own background is a mix of being passionate about the liberal arts and then spending about 15 years in social innovation and social enterprise. And so, as you'll hear about, LSI is an extraordinary blend of those two ideas, and a joy for me to be a partner in. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Dana Petty, to share who she is.
Thank you so much, Seth, and thank you to all of you. It's wonderful to be around the Zoom table with you, and we appreciate you taking your time today. So I'm Diana Petty. I have the extraordinary privilege of being the executive director of LSI. I have been in this role for 3 years and at the University of Chicago for 7, but I actually spent my first mountain, if you will, in and around city government in New York. So I worked in the Bloomberg administration doing civic tech initiatives and public-private partnership building. And so when I think about leadership for society, that's a bit of the vantage point and the sort of formative perspective that I bring. But it was during my time in New York that I got really excited about the role that academic institutions and higher ed can play in catalyzing leaders to deepen impact that communities they care about and want to support. And so I was fortunate to be involved in several civic leadership development programs that were really aimed at, giving leaders kind of skill building, networking, mentorship, space for reflection, and really taking a step back to think meaningfully about feelings of purpose and where they could really offer the most to social, economic, and environmental needs that they cared about. And so when I saw the opportunity through LSI to work arguably with individuals who are really at the peak of their wisdom, they're thinking with a different kind of intention and precision about how they want to deploy their talents in this chapter of life, I jumped at it and I pinch myself every day that I get to work with the people who come through LSI. So I'll turn it back to you, Seth, but I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Great, thank you, Diana. And alongside Diana, we have two LSI Fellows, and we'll start with Alice Davison, who is a member of the class of 2025. And Alice, do you want to just share your brief background and what drew you to LSI?
Happy to, and I'm thrilled to be one of the cohort members who got to spend time with Diana and her team. I had a long career at one place in financial services where I built and led teams related to recruiting and ultimately to development of our investor teams. I worked for a long-only mutual fund company based in Los Angeles. I lived on the East Coast and worked out of the New York office. My retirement in 2023 coincided with my 40th college reunion. I had a wonderful long career. I had many mountains at one place. But I was ready to do something else. I found myself thinking in 5-year increments, and while looking ahead for a year or two made sense, I knew that I didn't want to be doing what I was doing in 5 years. And so just over 2 years ago, I made the decision, actually just over 3 years ago, I made the decision to leave Capital, and I retired 2 years ago. I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. I had a number of buckets I wanted to fill. I wanted to spend more time with my friends and family. Of course, I wanted to focus on wellness. I knew that I wanted to do something else, big bucket, and I knew that I wanted to spend time learning. I started out filling the learning bucket online. I did a course in applied positive psych through Penn. There was no such thing in my college years as applied positive psych. Nothing was positive about psych, but this was interesting to me, and I wanted to know more about what it was. So I pursued the certificate program. They sort of come after you when you do online programs and say, do you want to do a master's, and wouldn't you like to be in a full-time program? And I didn't have an interest in a terminal degree, but I did develop an interest in learning and community with people. I knew I wanted to be in an academic environment, and so I started to explore what was out there. And Chicago was at the top of the list, in large part because of the community and the focus on societal impact. So my partner Howard and I and our two dogs moved from suburban New Jersey to Hyde Park. We spent the academic year, September to May, on campus essentially, and it was a transformative and really remarkable experience.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alice. And I now want to go to one of the members of our inaugural cohort from the class of 2024. Jeff Curtis, do you want to share who you are and what brought you to LSI?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here this morning. I feel like I do this very regularly, and I love being a part of these conversations because I really love talking about the program. I spent 30 years in the public relations and communications space. Most recently, as the slide says, I was chief communications officer at a biotechnology company called Horizon Therapeutics. We were acquired a little bit more than 2 years ago, and upon that acquisition, I exited the company and dove headfirst into.
Is that where?
Oh, we'll mute that. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Go
it's
for
okay.
it, Jeff.
I dove headfirst into LSI and was very happy that I did. I was looking for that bridge to what was going to be next, and LSI did help steer me in the direction to what's next. And I know we'll get into that a little bit later, but again, very happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, we are going to come back to Alice, Jeff, and Diana throughout this presentation, but I will get us started with the snapshot of LSI. And if you are in this virtual room, you probably know that LSI is a fellowship that supports distinguished leaders like Alice and Jeff who want to pursue meaningful next chapters for themselves and for society. And this is a recently launched endeavor 2.5 years ago by the University of Chicago. And I'll start by talking a little bit about why. And there's really a two-part rationale. The first, and you may know this as well if you're in this virtual room, is people are living longer. And especially among individuals who are in this group of distinguishment, who might have higher education and more resources, we're seeing dramatic improvements in longevity. And there's a broader conversation that's happening at this university and elsewhere about the research around why there's a bifurcation. But what we are focusing on with LSI is the reality that a group of individuals are now reliably looking to their 90s and beyond. And so as a result, have a whole nother chapter of adulthood or generativity. And the second rationale is that there are big challenges in the world that are very interconnected and systemic. And you think climate change, income inequality, AI in society, and they would benefit from the leadership of individuals who have had experience in large systems and with the type of collaborative leadership that it requires to be an executive across sectors. And so when you combine those two trends, LSI is essentially at the center of the intersection where you're saying, how do we help these individuals who are living longer to have really generative lives across the entirety of midlife and what could be second adulthoods? And then secondly, how do you activate this extraordinary leadership force for society? And so what LSI then does is it helps individuals through an expansive journey to find their why. What is that meaning and value that they want to execute on at this stage of life? Once, for many people, earning is no longer a primary objective, although it may still be there. What is that societal issue that calls them, that they want to work on? And then how do they actually find that intersection? And the way I describe it is that when the University of Chicago started in 1890, you on average lived till 48. So you had a 30-year adulthood. And if you came to the college, we prepared you for that 30-year adulthood. So people came with great talents, but then we expanded their horizons. We told them, here are all the possibilities. We had these incredible networks, and people then went off into their young adulthoods. Well, Now, on average, people in the US live to 78. So, doing the math, you have an entire second chapter of adulthood. Again, within the population we serve, that average is even higher. And we're the same idea now at a new stage of life. People come here, immense talents, great experience. We expand horizons, we offer new networks, and we create a space for real discernment. And then people can launch into that next chapter of generativity. So it's part of the life cycle that's changing and our real commitment to helping individuals find their why, what, and how at this new stage of that life cycle. So that is a brief description of LSI, but I want to now take down my screen and talk with the individuals who have actually lived this. And so, Jeff and Alice, let's start with you. I just described how LSI aims to help you to develop what we call your purpose plan for this next chapter. And so, can each of you maybe briefly describe your purpose plan and how LSI helped you to discern it? And Jeff, can we start with you?
Sure. So I actually ended up going two directions. The first and primary direction is I started building a standalone nonprofit while I was at LSI, and it went through various iterations. And frankly, I'm still in year two of the iterations, but hoping to get to launch in January, early February. So there has been progress made. But I'm focusing on first generation college students. I'm a first generation college graduate myself. And again, as I mentioned in my opening, spent my bulk of my career in PR and communications. So focusing on first generation students who are majoring in PR and communications, helping them not only amplify their skill set, but remove obstacles that commonly exist for first generation students. So I built a 2-year progressive curriculum with a curriculum developer who I was connected with through LSI. So again, to assess earlier point about connectivity within the university and the full force of the university being behind you in this program, that is absolutely true, because I wouldn't have met my curriculum developer if I wouldn't have gone through the program. But anyway, 2-year progressive curriculum, juniors and seniors, and it supplements their major curriculum. So right now it's being set up as a fellowship type of model. I'm partnering with 3 universities, Temple, American, and DePaul, and potentially University of Illinois, Chicago. And hopefully we'll see some momentum and some good outcomes in the next couple of years as I progress through the pilot. But it's been a very exciting time to build and a learning experience. It's not something that I'd done before. And I think part of the challenge was stepping outside of the comfort zone and being comfortable with stepping into a different area that I'm not an academic, and trying to pitch academics on something that you built is a different animal. And it's been a lot of fun, but it's also been met with some challenges. So I'm very happy about that. The second thing I'll say is that, and this was very much post LSI, is that I have a book coming out in late February, early March. So I'm going through the revisions process right now. I have about 6 more weeks in revisions. Scary time is that I have 5 manuscripts out to beta readers right now, and so I'm eagerly awaiting feedback on what that's going to be. So crossing my fingers, but it's my first book, and I'm kind of really putting myself out there in an interesting and vulnerable way that I hadn't before. So excited about that. But again, 2 different directions, but as I think Alice stated, it's finding that something new that can keep you going and kind of removes you a little bit from that past identity, which has been reinvigorating.
And Jeff, just really briefly, we heard about the connectivity of the LSI Fellowship. How else did it shape these 2 trajectories in terms of, thinking about what you wanted to do and then maybe helping activate?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry I missed that part of it. I think that what happened was, particularly in the cohort itself, I originally came in with a different idea for the nonprofit, and the cohort really pressure tested and challenged me on the concept, where I was focusing and where I should change my focus. It wasn't a complete 180, but it was close. And not to get into too many details, but really the feedback from the cohort, and frankly the professors and the staff for LSI was I was focused really heavily on deficiency modeling instead of more abundance modeling. And that even slight change in how I was approaching the student population was key in kind of making the idea a little bit more robust.
Awesome. And then Alice, can we come to you? You are early in this purpose plan because you're just months away from your LSI fellowship, but tell us about what it includes and how you're beginning to activate it.
Certainly. Thank you. So my focus is on social connections, the role that they play in healthy aging, and the importance of re-scripting a lot of the dialogues that we have at transition points. So with employers, financial planners, wellness programs, and insurance companies as intermediaries, how can we inject into the conversations about how one retires more information about the importance of being socially connected and avoiding its antidote, which is loneliness, and so harmful to our health over time. So we can have that long life that Seth talked about, but not if we're not healthy. I came with none of this in my toolkit. As Diana and Seth and probably Jeff know, I had, and I'd say I was probably the kind of median and mode of the class. Most of us had some ideas. A couple of us had no idea. Some had some very baked ideas, but most were somewhere in that, well, I sort of think I'm interested in this. And I had a couple of things in my hip pocket, things I'd been interested from my professional and my extracurricular nonprofit life. But I took a series of audit classes. I was kind of an audit. I loved my audits. I took a series of audit classes, which shone a brighter light on some of the research, some of the health impacts of loneliness, and the important positive work around social connection. So audits were a super important part of the process for me. Professors inside and out of the program were an important part of the program for me. And we also, I mentioned earlier that I came to LSI wanting to learn, which I did an enormous amount of, we all did. And I felt like I wanted to learn stuff, which I did. What I was more surprised by was the work that we did as a cohort to learn about ourselves. And you sort of think, okay, I've been here for 40 years, I've been doing this thing, to really be able to have the time to sort of craft our story, to talk in the cohort, to talk with people who haven't known us in other settings about what's important and where our values are. David, we spent a lot of time with David Brooks. We had him as an instructor for our cohort, and I can never remember the third one, but I gotta read it in the book. And he says that that folks discover their passion. Sometimes it's something that wakes you up in the night. It's something that you want to fix that bothers you. But oftentimes it's something that was interesting or something that you pursued and put down as a kid. And there was a lot of storytelling. There was a lot of sort of an opportunity to think about who we really are in the program. And that focus on connection for me goes back to my childhood. And so I'm grateful for the classroom learning. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn about myself. And I've walked away with something entirely new, super interesting and important to focus on.
Well, Alice and Jeff, those are excellent purpose plans. They give us a great sense tangibly of what this looks like. And Dan, I want to come to you because you've said if you've seen two purpose plans, you've seen two, because every fellow is unique, and you have now seen 62 fellows. And so can you talk a little bit about, at a high level, what are the different approaches that people are taking to their purpose planning, and just give us the spectrum that's out there that we've seen so far in LSI.
Absolutely. And so I want to, before we I share some observations and reflections on what has come out of the fellowship, I want to give a little bit of context of kind of how we see fellows come in. And there's essentially three characteristics that we see as really unifying LSI fellows at the start of the fellowship experience. The first is that they are at or approaching some kind of inflection point that may be professional, it may be personal, it may be a blend of those things. There is not like a one size fits all transition, but everyone comes in either kind of feeling a degree of readiness, or they are at the point of readiness to make some kind of, reimagination of this next chapter of their lives. The second, and both Jeff and Alice spoke to this beautifully, is that they're motivated by the world around them, and really have kind of a fire in their belly. They're concerned about things they're seeing, and really feel strongly and kind of called to and compelled that they have expertise, they have talents, they have capabilities, they have momentum that they could offer, and they really want to be thoughtful about how they could contribute those things to society. And then finally is that they're intellectually curious, and they're looking for a structure, a method, a community to come in and really widen the aperture of how they're thinking about themselves, as Alice said, how they're thinking about society, how they're thinking about the action they may take moving forward. And have come to believe that entering into making an educational investment and going through an educational experience will be informative and instructive as they choose, what awaits them in their future living and leading purposefully. And then beyond those three dimensions, we find that LSI Fellows are essentially unique and distinct and diverse in almost every other measure you could imagine. And one of those, which Alice also mentioned, is that they come in with kind of varying ideas about their future. And we find that to be extremely productive within the context of the peer learning, because you do have some fellows who have, Jeff mentioned, like, he came in with an idea, he wanted to stress test it, it evolved, but he came in with something that he was really drawn to. Alice, on the other hand, came in at kind of very top of funnel, high upstream, wanted to think about a lot of different things, and sort of went through a kind of funneling process of what really spoke to her. And speaking of David Brooks, he's been so influential, and he is really, I think, passionate about this type of transition. And so he's kind of constantly tinkering with, I just wanted to piggyback on what Alice shared, because I heard him say this to the current cohort last week for the first time. And he said that for him, his observations are that kind of defining your sense of purpose at this moment of your life, or what your next mountain is, or what might be a vocation, it is more analogous in his mind to the sensation of falling in love than it is solving a complex math equation, right? I think we do see a lot of fellows and a lot of leaders come in, and they're thinking about, like, all right, what data am I gathering? What evaluation, what calculation am I making? Like, it's a very kind of logical and linear thing. And he was like, what I witness and what I see is that it's something that speaks to you on an emotional level. And I don't mean to minimize, I do think the process of prioritization is really important. And we've seen that be something that fellows are very intentional about. But I leave that with the audience, because I thought that was that resonated with me. And so it's no surprise that the kind of continuum we see of purpose plan that come out of the fellowship are what we call an outside-in approach or an inside-out approach. And what we mean by that is that some fellows leave having identified a kind of impact area that they are, really drawn to and feel really energized and animated about. And it can be, anything under the sun, you name it, there's probably an LSI fellow thinking about it, right? You heard Jeff and Alice talk about first generation, access and kind of educational opportunity for first generation students, healthy aging and the epidemic of loneliness. We have folks thinking about violence reduction, food insecurity, democracy reform, and kind of election opportunity and increased representation. And they leave kind of feeling like, if I can even move the needle in the most incremental way, if I can offer something of my expertise and my assets that I've amassed, I'm going to feel a sense of purpose and kind of meaning and fulfillment in this moment. On the other end of the spectrum, we find folks really kind of, Alice mentioned this too, they're hanging out in the knowing oneself side of the curriculum and the learning journey. And their realizations are a little bit more around, kind of reinvesting in their wisdom and bringing it out in new ways that are intellectually expansive and kind of offer something to the world around them. and believing that that will allow them to be the most impactful leader that they could be in this moment. So those are folks who are writing, like Jeff, they're publishing, they're teaching, they're creating curriculum for others, they're mentoring or they're advising. And then we see everything in between. And so it's been really powerful to kind of be able to support people to find something that's very connective to them on a personal level, while still seeing the kind of cohort and peer learning process as a true accelerant to the ideas and the discernment and the distillation of each individual who's a part of it. So, yeah, I'll turn it back to you, Seth, but that's a bit of what we've seen so far.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. We're going to come back to you in a moment, but I now want to walk everyone through the learning journey itself. And so we often talk at LSI about a three-part learning journey, and we'll then put meat on the bones after kind of giving you a sense of the trajectory. It all starts with knowing oneself. And so this is a moment where individuals are often changing in their identity, their purpose, and their community. And so we think it's really important to take a moment to examine who are you and who do you want to be at this stage of life. And the way we approach this, being a university where fun comes to die, is that you read many great books from across many different approaches, and so Western, Eastern, and beyond. And you look at how people across time and space have answered the question of why am I here, and what kind of purpose and legacy do I want for my life? And so those are big questions. We sometimes joke that these great books can be wasted on the young, because when you read them after 30 or 40 years of experience, it changes how every one of these texts reads and what you receive from it. And so that is what we consider to be the foundation. And then the second pillar is understanding the world. And that's really about looking at the biggest societal issues from different lenses. And you'll hear from economists and sociologists and scientists, and they'll look at the same issues, but they'll often look at them very differently. So there's an economist who runs our crime lab, and he will look at the data, and he will say, if you prosecute, crime goes down. There's a sociologist who won a MacArthur Genius Award here, who wrote a book looking at the vicious cycle of prosecution that can sometimes lead to whole families being engulfed in a system and not allowing that family to leave. They will disagree very aggressively on how to approach solutions. Our role at LSI is to help you to think critically, to help you to ask the right questions, and then to give you multiple lenses on the world, and to hopefully help you with your fluency. One very real challenge for individuals who want to move into a more societal direction is that after 30 or 40 years of leadership in a field, they may have really learned how to think about it from that lens. And so a business leader may be thinking very much like an economist and want to impact issues like crime. And then they're in a room with individuals who are with a sociological or social work or other background, and they may say, oh, I don't believe in prosecution for this level. And you may be sitting there with your economist lens saying, how could you not believe it? The data is clear. But now, hopefully, even if you continue to have your primary lens, in that conversation, you're saying, oh, I understand other ways to view the situation. And what we find so far is that this doesn't fundamentally change how people view the world. Most people, by the point they get to LSI, they have a lens. What it does is it expands their fluency with lots of other lenses. And if you want to move in a more societal direction, we find that can be critical, because often being at the intersection of multiple sectors and wanting to move work forward requires being able to see things from multiple lenses so that you can collaborate and so that you can constantly expand your wisdom. And I think even as Jeff talked earlier about, moving from that deficit to abundance mindset, it's those types of expansions that can take place as we more deeply understand the world. And then finally, envision the future. And this is the very practical side. So the first two are taught by our eminent faculty here at the university, with some additional extraordinary people like David Brooks mixed in. And then this piece of the curriculum is actually taught by practitioners who are actually in the different areas of expertise that many LSI Fellows gravitate toward in their next chapter. So strategic philanthropy, we have the former head of one of the largest strategy philanthropy firms in the world. In areas like board leadership, we have leaders from executive search, and people that have served in the capacity of board chair at some of the largest corporations and nonprofits in the world. How do you impact social change? We have people that have been in the social venture philanthropy space. And then we have opportunities for you to think deeply about how you actually approach the decision of, do you have a portfolio life? Do you have a next career? Do you have potentially a startup like Jeff was describing? So those are the three pillars, and then they are supplemented by three different types of advisors: an executive coach who is helping you to really think about you, where you want to go, and prepare for that. For example, if you want to serve on a corporate board, you need a certain type of board biography in order to put your name forward. We have an academic advisor who's helping you to think about the societal issue that you want to deeply understand, investigate, and then impact. And then we have a distinguished mentor. That's someone that is about 5 to 10 years into the next chapter, and they have experience often in the area where you want to head. And so we do this in a very customized and personalized way. And they're giving you their life experience, especially over the last 5 to 10 years since they made their transition, to help you with yours. And most importantly, all of this takes place in a cohort. And the reason the cohort is so critical is that it turns out if you're changing in an identity, purpose, and community, then you need a set of peers in order to anchor your thinking about what that looks like. Because as Plato said, we are social animals. And so to be able to go through this moment of inflection with others who are at a similar moment and compare notes on who you are becoming is vital to your becoming. And so with that, I'm going to just mention that we do want to have partners on this journey as well. That means that partners are invited to many of the moments in the fellowship. And so in the orientation, we have international study for those who are in the design pathway. Those are all opportunities for partners. And then there are times where people want to apply and their partner wants to apply as well. And we're glad to talk with you about those cases too. And with that, let me take down my screen and we will come back to our wonderful panelists. And so Diana, can I start with you this time? I've just talked about a number of the elements. What do you think are the greatest strengths of the experience?
Yeah, so there's kind of a few things we try to balance within the container that Seth just walked you through. And so, the first area of balance we look for is that there's a meaningful collective journey balanced with opportunity for customization and individualization based on the unique interests of fellows. And so, there is this cohort, there's kind of a core curriculum that you go through alongside your peers. It's that liberal arts style widening of the aperture that Seth described, that's really, aimed at helping our fellows build a very dynamic, multidimensional set of tools that they can pick up and put down in different moments as their next chapter unfolds. And you heard Jeff say, and this is very true, that, even though they leave with kind of directional confidence of where they want to head and the things they want to focus on, there's certainly an ongoing iteration and evolution as they leave. And so setting them up for dynamism and being able to really kind of pull from some of these different ways of reflecting and investigating and planning, we hope will really be of service to them as this next stage takes shape. But so the opportunities for individualization are, again, fellows want, have kind of specific things that they want to build, they want to develop, they want to learn about. And so we see, the ability for fellows to kind of choose their own adventure, whether that's through audit courses, whether that's through bespoke advising, who really, individuals who are thought leaders and subject matter experts who have kind of most pertinent knowledge for that fellows set of goals. And then we also have, kind of ways for fellows to embed themselves and really dive deep into different centers and institutes and campus collaborators who are of greatest interest to them. So we've seen that be valuable to have that dose of the peer kind of shared liberal arts style learning with the ability to really shape other elements in alignment with what you're hoping to leave with. The second area of harmony, and you heard Seth talk to this as well, is balancing the philosophical with the practical. And so we do, again, by design, and this is very much the part of the kind of DNA of a running joke at the University of Chicago is, Sure, that's how it works in practice, but really, how does it, like, how can we think about it in theory, right? And so we do ask our fellows to like take a step back and interrogate theoretical concepts, very macro definitions of different forces and phenomenon, both in terms of how we define, you know, what it means to be a good life, you know, live a good life, be a good leader, and have a good society. But we also allow them to really roll up their sleeves and have exposure to practical applications, practicum style learning, and experiences that really get them closer to how these things happen, you know, in the real world, in specific contexts. And so we've seen that, you know, inviting the fellows and to just not need to know the exact answers or the exact applications, and to really just think about the framing of the questions has been very beneficial to expanding their thinking. But then because they are action oriented, they're very decisive, they're very successful and capable at building and growing and creating momentum. Being able to then look at those case studies, think about, you know, what's working in reality and where there might be deltas or gaps in knowledge, is also of greatest service to them. And then the last kind of area of balance I'll just mention is, you know, the kind of balancing of the where fun goes to die that you heard from Seth, with really allowing space for creativity and joy and playfulness in this type of learning. And so the University of Chicago and LSI kind of falls to this standard, is a place of deep and rigorous thought and inquiry. And the fellows and we take it very seriously, the kind of commitment to educational excellence and you know, intellectual thought. But we also have learned that for this life stage, for this group of leaders, being able to be creative, to think outside the box, to dream, to and to build real relationships and friendships, and enjoy just each other's company as human beings, rather than just the, you know, really kind of hard-hitting academic and scholarly components of the program, that both have a place, both are necessary, and both play a role in achieving optimal outcomes for the cohort. So those are some of the things we think about, though. I'll be curious to see or hear how Jeff and Alice have lived it.
Yes, so Jeff and Alice, let's come to you. You have had many experiences in LSI as a student, again, in the classroom, with your next chapter advisors and discernment, with a lot of bells and whistles, the trip, in your case, Jeff, to London, in your case, Alice, to Paris, and looking at topics in each that were relevant to the focus of LSI. Can you just talk about what it was like to become a student again, and some of your most memorable bells and whistles from the experience? And Alice, since you're more recent in experience, do you want to share?
Sure. So this is a little thing. We walked up, I kid you not, like 3 steep flights of stairs, and our classes weren't back to back. So then we had to go down the stairs, and then we had to go back up for this. So we literally trudged 3 seasons long up these marble worn stairs to this I think this beautiful classroom with trees that looked out over the midway, and this big oval table. And there was, I sort of described this like magic of the oval table. And it was so worth it. I would walk those stairs backwards at this point to kind of be in that setting. The professors were amazing, as both Seth and Diana mentioned. It's we were so fortunate to be taught by the people who taught us, and they were really into it. Like they value the cohort. They engaged us in ways that I think might have been newer and different for them. There's several of them whom we see outside of class. As I mentioned, I live just outside of New York. I was in the city 10 days ago with a professor, my partner Howard, and a couple from the current cohort. He's chairman of the board of a theater company, and he makes a point of including LSI folks at his productions in Chicago. He had a small play in New York, and so we joined him there. The professors were amazing. And Jeff, you were actually the person who sort of introduced me to this here. Jeff and I met very early in my year, so in my early part of my year. The cohorts, there's a lot of there's a lot of collaboration and strong relationships across the cohorts. I think that's only deepening, but Jeff and I spent time super early on. He is modest, so he hasn't mentioned that he spends a lot of time mentoring folks on campus. And he introduced me to that as an amazing part of the program. And so in addition to spending time with somebody who Jeff has really mentored and helped develop a business, I was able to spend time with some Boost students with a project somewhat related to my focus area, who were doing a startup and pitching through the Verstandi Center. So the opportunity to engage with undergrads, to learn from the cohort, of course, the professors, but to also to learn intergenerationally was super positive. I mentioned that we moved to Hyde Park. It was, we loved it. We loved the activities on campus. You're a full member of the university. That was a super highlight. You mentioned, Paris was phenomenal, obviously, and we had a longevity focus there. So the topic was really important. The university resources at the Paris Center were great. And then the opportunity to spend social time with our cohort and partners, second to none. So those, and there's not a day that goes by that I'm not in touch with one of the 21 other people from my cohort. So super positive experience from that perspective.
And Jeff, can we come to you and just talk about your experience and being a student again after 30 years of corporate life and other aspects of it?
Yeah, I think a couple things I want to point out. Being the first to do something is a little daunting. And you really don't know what you're getting into until you get into it. And I think a lot of us in the first inaugural cohort were looking for a refreshing experience. And I think that's exactly what it was. The conversation, the ability to be open, the ability to dive deep into topics and challenge one another in a way that I don't think too many of us get to do in corporate life. For me, it was refreshing to just be able to be free from a thinking standpoint and free from a conversation standpoint. I always say that it's interesting to me because you for 30, 40 years, you have your people. You think you have your people around you who are going to challenge you, going to be there as thought partners. And I think you do. But I will say that this experience I don't know that I could have put together a better think tank of people if I was constructing it in my own network. And I was very surprised by that, but also very refreshed by that we had each other's backs pretty quickly. We gelled pretty quickly, but it was just that freedom and refreshing piece that really stood out to me, because I think we all long for that level and that type and that depth of conversation as we are trying to figure out what may be next.
Great. Well, thank you for those great reflections. And I want to now move us quickly through the rest of the presentation so we can get to your questions. And so what Alice and Jeff have described is the experience of being in the design pathway, which you see on your right. That is an immersive pathway where you come here for the full academic year, and you do so as what we consider in our parlance to be a full-time student. You take 3 cohort-based classes, you take 2 audits, and you are here really deeply. And we set it up so that it's Monday to Wednesday so that people do have the ability to travel, make board commitments and other things, but it is immersive. And that is the only pathway that has existed until now. But over the last 2.5 years, we have received a lot of questions from leaders who have said, I am currently in my full-time role, and I don't want to wait until it ends to begin thinking about what's next. I love to imagine that pathway into my future while I am still with these significant commitments. And so we're thrilled that we now have 2 pathways, and the Imagine will begin this January, and it will be for leaders who need flexibility because they have either a portfolio life that is very full, even if they've reached that inflection, or a full-time career, and they're wanting to balance those career responsibilities or portfolio activities with the ability to imagine what's next. And so you could call it the executive MBA version of the fellowship. And we very much are trying to keep it deep and rigorous, but allow it to be flexible enough to meet the needs of individuals who already have very full responsibilities. So what does that look like in practice? In the Imagine pathway, it is hybrid. You are here for four-day retreats, one each quarter of the calendar year, plus there is some activity online in between, although what we have done with the online activity is we have made sure you're always in a small room of typically 2 to 3 people. You're going to meet with your executive coach each month in between, and you're going to meet with a group of progress partners that you're paired with as you work on your purpose plan. So you will be using that time in between those quarterly retreats, but you will not be in big Zoom rooms where someone's just talking at you. You will be constantly building relationships and using it in a generative way. Now, on the other hand, in the design pathway, you are fully in person over the entirety of the academic year. So the required number of in-person days for Imagine is 16. The required for design is a total of 95 because it's 3 days for each of the 10-week quarters, of which there are 3. And so you can see here, there's a big difference in the number of instructional hours, but the content and the coursework is the same. It's just in a more compact version in Imagine. So another key question that people ask is, okay, so that's the totality from a dosage perspective. What does that actually mean from an activity perspective? Same curriculum, and you'll notice a lot of the checks are the same. You're a full fellow, you are working on your capstone project, you are getting executive coaching. What's different? In design, we have an Aspen Institute seminar, which is 4 days where you go through a number of texts together and you think about values, purpose, and leadership. We have the travel study that Alice described in Paris and that Jeff was part of in London, where you focus on an issue that relates. This year, we'll be going back to the UK and looking at democracy and constitutional democracy. You have a full campus immersion set. And then in the Imagine pathway, you'll see that you get flexibility. And we also do have lodging on campus so that it's a very seamless experience. We are in a similar place in terms of what you're completing. There is a why, what, and how, but there are different levels of granularity. In Imagine, you're really clarifying your intrinsic motivations and how those might inform your future. You're looking at different possibilities for the future. In Design, you are getting all the way to what we call a roadmap. And so you'll see that use of these different metaphors. In Imagine, you get a compass. You have a sense of where you want to head. In Design, you have a full roadmap and a GPS that is ready to hopefully take you in the direction you want to go. And I'll just say that for both groups, you join at the completion of the fellowship, the LSI Alliance, where then you have an ongoing role with the LSI community. We say you're a fellow for good with both meanings of that word. And you can continue to access resources as well as come back for annual events and be part of alumni interest groups. So let me just briefly share from a timeline perspective that we are, and you've probably seen this before, looking for leaders who have 2 decades of senior level experience. Jeff and Alice happen to come from the private sector. That's where about 60 to 65% of fellows typically come from, but about 1/3 to 35% are coming from the social and public sectors. So people that have been government officials, elected officials, people that have led at the highest levels of the nonprofit sector, in the arts, as well as in health. We have doctors, professors, and we really find that mix of people that represent the economy as a whole helps to create generativity in both directions, where we've had nonprofit leaders who then went on to serve on corporate boards, and many of our corporate leaders who then went on to play leadership roles in nonprofits. The first step of all of this is to submit your candidacy. We've kept it simple. You put in your bio or a resume, and what we're really looking for there is, do you qualify based on the eligibility? Then we invite you to fill out a full application, knowing that at this point you are eligible, but we really want to see especially your essays and your references, which we call, to understand whether or not you would be a strong fit with the goals of LSI. And then finally, you participate in an interview. We are not just about getting the people with the best titles. We are very fortunate. We had over 800 candidacies. We have a lot of people with incredible titles. What makes this program work is a cohort that is humble, that wants to give to one another and that wants to go through a vulnerable journey together. And so what we're doing across this application process is we're really solving for those goals, because as you heard from Jeff and Alice, the number one value is the cohort. So we are extremely focused on selecting people that are not just going to benefit, but that are going to benefit everyone else in the cohort and create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And with that, I should say that there is a fee for the program. It's consistent with a year of full-time study or executive study here at the University of Chicago. We also want to emphasize that there are significant scholarships available, especially for individuals who may be coming from the public and social sectors, as we want to make sure that this is accessible across a broad range of leadership. And with that, I'm going to take down my screen, and we have about 10 minutes for questions, and we are eager to hear your questions. There are 3 ways to do it. You can put your question in the chat. You can use the react function at the bottom to raise your hand. I'm also going to allow people to unmute, and so in that case, you can just begin shouting out your question should you want to do so. As you'll learn in LSI, it is a very boisterous group. In fact, it usually takes me 3 claps whenever just 20 fellows are together to try to get attention. So please feel free to jump in and scream out. It would make you very much at home with the LSI community. What questions do you have for Diana, Alice, and Jeff? Yeah, go for it, Sunday.
Hi, this is Sunday Jones. Thank you so much for a terrific presentation. Actually, I can also put my video on. It's so terrific. Hi, how are you all? To hear from you all, especially the difference between the imagine and the design pathways. Would you say a little bit more about particular gaps that fellows might feel like they want to address, and whether they would address those gaps through audited classes? For example, if one wants to go deeper into financial analysis or any other kind of more technical, I think, gap that people might want to feel. If you could say a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, so first, we should say that right now the construct is that if you're in design, you have the option of 2 audit classes every quarter. There are a couple people that are doing Imagine. They're getting the compact core curriculum, and then we've separately worked with them if they live in Chicago to potentially audit a class along the way. But that is on a per class basis then that they're taking that in. So it's possible in either. But because the classes here at the university run overwhelmingly in person, it does require Chicago proximity. And then let me turn it over to Diana for the rest of that answer in terms of how people approach that question.
Yeah, so I'll say, this was always our hypothesis, and it is borne true. Stepping into a place like the University of Chicago, where there are 5,000 faculty members and professionalized researcher, is really daunting, and it's hard to figure out exactly, sort of in an efficient way where you might plug in or where you might find some intellectual assets or resources that could help you plug your unique gaps. And so at the start of both the design and imagine pathways, we ask fellows to fill out what we call a baseline survey, where we're just collecting some data as a team on what ideas you have, what areas you're thinking about focusing on, with full recognition that it will evolve and it will change and be dynamic over your year, but just kind of where you're starting, such that our team can help you with a little bit of like creating some personalized wayfinding based on your interest areas. And so we do offer sort of short lists of names of, actual people, whether they're kind of part of our campus community or they're folks in Chicago that we have in our larger LSI network, who might have insights and relevance that could help you with filling your kind of individual gaps that you're interested in. So you kind of start with, here's the subset of people that we're aware of where you can begin your journey, you can begin your exploration. Here are centers and institutes that we think you might, want to spend some particular time at. And we find that just being able to start with that anchoring and kind of that entry point really helps fellows accelerate their understanding of like where they want to focus their time and what parts of the university can really be most aligned with the kind of gap filling that you're talking about.
Thanks, Cindy. Alice, anything to add? And then I see Nancy, your hand.
Yeah, I was just good. I mean, just to sort of pile on, I think my experience or sort of, across our cohort, we had folks who did it all. So we had some folks who wanted a deeper dive into nonprofit management, some folks who wanted a better understanding of accounting, and they found what they needed at Booth, for example. So there was that sort of technical deep dive. We also, our first term was during the election. We had a lot of people who were interested in sort of what's going on in the world, and that drove a group of people in one direction. High level introduction into particular areas, and then being, sort of following a professor, finding a super compelling professor was another, I think, big factor around who audited what.
Nancy, I saw your hand. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks so much for all of this background. I really appreciate it. I am interested to know a little bit more about what's in the core curriculum.
Yeah.
What topics are you covering? How much time? Just sort of lay that out with a little more specificity if you could.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll turn it over to Anna. I'll just say that one of the beauties of what she's been able to accomplish is getting the very best faculty from across the university, and mainly through mini courses that they then build a team across the curriculum. And so, Diana, you can describe what that looks like.
Yeah, so and so this will look a little different between the two pathways. But essentially what we try to do is, we have an umbrella of sort of thematic or topical areas across the three pillars: knowing oneself, understanding the world, and envisioning the future. And in addition to those like kind of thematical topical areas, we have particular methods or frameworks or approaches that we think would be beneficial to our fellows. So for example, within understanding the world, as Seth kind of alluded to, you're going to get a dose of different frameworks for your own inner journey, whether that's humanistic inquiry, whether that's lessons from psychology. We have a neuroscientist who teaches how the brain shapes our moral compass and ethical reasoning, and so on. And then, you're getting the kind of understand the world, economics, political science, history, sociology, and then finally those kind of practitioner lenses. And so the way we use those shared themes is we try to have faculty who are speaking to those shared themes or topical areas, but from those very diverse vantage points, as Seth was mentioning, where you might have someone who's kind of arguing in favor of a more quantitative approach to crime reduction versus a more qualitative analysis of the human impact of recidivism. And so what you're getting kind of within the core courses is the ability to play with those different frameworks, those different lenses, and those different pathways to action and taking change. And really, I think what's most valuable, I would say, about the core is that it gives our fellows new like definitions and new measures for phenomenon and forces and factors that they're already very familiar with, right? Like an easy example of this is we have a faculty member who teaches a series on how to think sociologically. And what he's giving our fellows is the way that the field of study of sociology, the units of measure for being able to quantify, what different cultural patterns are happening, what are those forces, and how do they affect our, our lives as individuals, our lives in social groups, and our, kind of understanding of the way institutions are built around culture. And his sort of running joke is that the first time he ever taught this course with undergraduates decades ago, one of the students, a 19-year-old, piped up in the class and said, sociology sounds like more like obviousology. And that's because what sociology does, I mean, it's, the way it gives definition to the world around us, we all understand it intuitively because we live it day to day, but it allows a new set, type of precision. It allows an ability to say, I want to know why people's behaviors make them do this, even if it might be at odds with their best self-interest. And it gives our fellows kind of a method and a structure for being able to define that with kind of greater accuracy in a different way. And so So really you're getting like what is dosed in the core. Again, it's themes like, what does it mean to live a good life? What does a good society look like? How can we understand the efficacy of different interventions that change societal outcomes at the individual, the kind of cultural, and at the institutional and geopolitical levels? And then how are there kind of best practices and forward-looking strategies for going out and actually enacting that change in practice?
Thank you, Diana. I know we are at time. We want to be respectful of everyone. I don't see other questions, but let me suggest this. Okay, great. You have one,
Fine.
Sarah.
I do. I'm
We'll
sorry.
say
Yeah,
for
thank you
Bobby
very
and
much.
Sarah
Yes.
that we are dismissed from the group. But why don't Diana and I, if that sounds good, we'll stay after and talk with the two of you so we can make sure to answer your questions.
I have a question too. I'll stay on.
Great, perfect. Yeah, so please stay on. Apologies that we have all too much excitement about this program. And thank you all for joining us. And those that have questions, we'll stay on with you. Have a
Thank you,
good
fellows.
afternoon to everyone else. And we'll take down recording just to be respectful.
Thank you, Alice and Jeff.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you.